Now, when is that lack of focus a symptom of ADHD, and when is it a result of anxiety? Here to answer that question more is psychiatrist Dr. Kristy Lamb.
Hi, Kyle. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about how ADHD and anxiety can often be misconstrued for one another, and also in the same breath, there are overlapping symptoms for both.
Absolutely. So I very commonly will have someone come in for an initial evaluation thinking that they have ADHD with concentrational issues, difficulty kind of sustaining to finish a task, distractibility, a lot of symptoms that would be significant in regard to an ADHD diagnosis. But when we finish the interview, when I get really clear in regard to evaluating them in regard to anxiety, we can notice that a lot of these signs and symptoms are actually related to a primary anxiety diagnosis. And so the overlap here is very common. Misdiagnosis versus overlap. So the idea that someone may have just anxiety that results in a lot of symptoms that look like ADHD, or someone who has ADHD and has anxiety, and then it becomes a little bit of both, and the anxiety will almost always exacerbate those specific symptoms of ADHD, of attention and focus. So it can be really helpful to kind of tease these out. So great topic for today.
Well, let's begin on teasing them out, because I think understanding a solution requires us to really first understand what we're actually dealing with. So if I'm somebody in the workplace who just cannot focus, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to do it, but I can't seem to grasp the focus. How do I start to determine if this is due to unmanaged anxiety or actual ADHD?
Great. Yeah, so the first thing that I would ask someone to do would be to check in with their bodies. That if we, by definition, look at anxiety as a physiological symptoms in the body, that anxiety is not our thoughts, it is not just distractibility, but that we will often find signs in our bodies that let us know that we are anxious. So being really clear and understanding what anxiety is at its core can be really helpful to help differentiate. So if someone has a bouncing leg, now this happens across the board with lots of different people, but a bouncing leg is a sign of anxiety discharge. It can be with excitement. It can be with productivity, that people's leg starts to bounce when they get excited about something. The physiology of the body is getting activated. But I would suggest that a bouncing leg, a tight chest, checking in on our breathing to see, does somebody have a deep, full breath, or is their breath really restricted? Can they think straight and clearly, meaning not that they can put sentences together, their thinking and cognition is not impaired, but they're just distracted. This is a big difference between anxiety and ADHD. So lower levels of anxiety are going to have physiological stress response in the body, tight muscles, fidgety, that kind of thing. As it gets higher, it can go into the smooth muscle. We can have some stomach upset, that kind of thing. So if stomach upset is coming with a migraine, headache is coming with a distraction, we're going to be looking more at an anxiety picture rather than an ADHD picture. The highest level of anxiety is when our minds kind of go offline. So people who lose time, people who, it's not that they're just distracted, they literally can't kind of get their thoughts to kind of form linear processes. When I see a patient who has this highest level of anxiety where their brain's kind of gone offline, they start to speak a little bit, what did you say? Their thinking is off. So it's not just a distractibility, but their brain is actually struggling to do the processes that it would normally do. If these signs or symptoms are coming up, we have a much clearer picture that this is an anxiety-related loss of concentration as opposed to an ADHD underlying concentrational issue.
When you brought up the restlessness of the bouncing leg, which could be due to anxiety or it could also be due to excitement, it reminded me of something that someone once told me, which is that excitement and nervousness are two opposite ends of the same coin. So the same feeling I could feel when I'm actually nervous about something, maybe giving a speech in a group of people or doing a presentation at a conference or something, is the same type of energy that I would feel if I was really excited to go on a roller coaster. Not that I would be excited to go on a roller coaster, but for someone who would be excited about that. Is that true, that excitement energy and that nervous energy is coming from the same space?
Absolutely. If we think about physiology, right, the nervous system gets triggered, and an activation happens in the autonomic nervous system that first starts in the somatic nervous system, the nervous system that we have control over. So the somatic nervous system is the motor control we have to clench our jaw, to fidget with our hands. This is actually the first thing that gets activated when we are excited or anxious. And then it moves into the autonomic nervous system, which we don't have control over, which is our breathing pattern, our heart rate, all of the things that activate us for action, right? And this makes sense whether we're activating for action like a performance that could be really fun and exciting, or activating for action in that fight or flight, oh my goodness, there's something in my environment that I have to get away from. So the nervous system activation to activate is the same pathway. And this is one technique that some people use to actually regulate their anxiety, is to notice, oh, actually, I am excited about this. I am looking forward to it, that we can put a positive spin and kind of a cognitive reframe on, obviously not on everything that makes us anxious, but on many things that we get anxious about. There is a way to kind of twist it to be able to see, actually, this is something really exciting. And if I can allow myself to enjoy that, these sensations in my body, I can categorize as excitement rather than a fearful anxiety and nervousness.
Just from a statistical standpoint, Dr. Lamb, what are the chances an adult in America would have ADHD versus anxiety?
Great question. I think this helps clarify all of the people coming in with ADHD and noticing that there's a much higher prevalence of anxiety that I've seen in my practice. So statistically, it's about 8% of US adults who will have a diagnosis of ADHD, where it's 30% of adults in the US who in the past year will have been identified with a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And so we can tell there's going to be, as I mentioned, there's going to be overlap, but there is a much greater prevalence of anxiety. And so teasing that out is actually, in my opinion, is imperative before even getting an ADHD diagnosis, so that we can clear out any anxiety symptoms that may be exacerbating. And then often we may find somebody who still has concentrational issues, but may not need medication. When they regulate their anxiety, they're really able to use kind of behavioral tools that can help them focus in a way that really mitigates the diagnosis being hugely impactful in their life. When you've got ADHD plus anxiety, you're really a setup for having consequences in your life and more exacerbated symptoms. And so getting that diagnosis clear and clearing out the anxiety, or dealing with the anxiety concurrently, is really important.
At its highest level, ADHD and anxiety can keep people from actually completing the tasks. A lot of times with some anxiety, we can grit through that, but at its worst, we cannot. So when we are at a point where we cannot, for whatever reason, get these tasks at work completed, when should we be looking at ADHD symptoms versus anxiety symptoms?
So I think that it's always appropriate if your symptoms, regardless of whether or not you understand where they're coming from, whether it's anxiety or ADHD, it's always appropriate to get consultation, to reach out to get support, potentially to be tested. The really kind of gold standard in regard to ADHD is neuropsych testing, to be able to really be tested to tease out the difference between anxiety and concentrational kind of underlying ADHD issues. That being said, when tasks are being hard to finish, we want to kind of tease out a little bit, is the issue that my brain goes offline, I can't think straight, or is it that I'm distracted? That as I try to sit down and focus, my brain goes to another place. A distinction that we could kind of use is overactive brain versus brain that's kind of shut off. Now, these can look physiologically somewhat similar, that someone's sitting down and their head's going over to the other, staring out the window. It may be staring out the window as they're trying to regulate and bring their anxiety back down. They may be staring out the window thinking about their grocery list and what they need to do this afternoon. And maybe if I go down this loop, the ADHD brain that can go down lots of rabbit holes may look distracted in a similar way as somebody whose brain is offline. So we really have to ask the person who's navigating, what's your experience? And we can tease this out with nuances of looking to see any other signs or sensations of anxiety. The person who's distracted with ADHD is often in a pretty calm state. They might be excited about the mental kind of rabbit holes that they can go down and get excited about going down certain paths that can have them pull away from the original task. But they're not usually going to be physiologically anxious in a way that somebody who is experiencing a distractibility because of anxiety would. I also want to highlight that while the most common thing that I see for people who are really differentiating ADHD from anxiety when they come in to see me, there is that their brain is kind of offline. There's also distractibility and avoidance that can come with anxiety, that if certain things make me anxious, I may avoid them because they make me anxious and choose to go somewhere else, to say, I don't want to have to deal with this. It brings up too much inside of me. And often people with anxiety will have an awareness of like, it makes me too anxious. I pull away from it, as opposed to, for better or worse, the analogy, like squirrel, like I just move away without really conscious control or deciding whether or not to do it. That may come with a more foundational ADHD diagnosis.
So whether it's anxiety or ADHD, there are plenty of people who are struggling to focus at work. They can't help but be restless at work. And in the worst case, like we just mentioned, they can't finish these projects. Is there any evidence-based strategies you can provide that could help these individuals go through these challenges? A, when it's happening at work, I'm in it, I need a solution right now. And B, something I can do maybe at home to prepare myself for the workday.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I think that there are lots of great techniques in regard to ADHD. I think that what I would love to highlight is the notion that when we are anxious, ADHD symptoms are going to be worse. So if we don't know whether this is anxiety or ADHD, I would start with an anxiety regulation technique. So one of the most important things that we can do is first do a body scan. I will often recommend that my patients, when they are starting to feel distracted, when they are starting to get into self-attacking thoughts, the resultant kind of symptom that they may see after they get anxious, I can't focus, or gosh, I'm ruminating in some way. If I can notice when I'm doing that, come to my body and just start a body scan to check in and see, okay, is my brow furrowed? No. Can I relax it? Is my jaw clenched? Ooh, a little bit. Can I release my biting surface? Is my chest tight? Can I take a deeper breath? Can I go all the way down through my body, checking to see for areas of tension, for breath, anywhere that I might be, clamping that I can then release. That just attuning to our bodies can help regulate and bring down the anxiety. If we can do this in conjunction with some nice deep breaths, we're going to be able to bring down the anxiety and hopefully come back to some of that focus that is a part of the ADHD presentation or the anxiety presentation. Now, I love the fact, Kyle, that you're talking about in real time and then also at home. And I think that the number of people that I have talked to who do the opposite, who don't use in real time the stuff that they've actually been practicing at home, is actually pretty shocking. I do meditation in the morning. I do breath work at night. I don't realize that I need to do that when I'm actually in game time and when this is actually happening. So I will often talk about the analogy of basketball, of practicing a free throw, that when I was young and played basketball, right, I would dribble, spin, follow through. That was to do the free throw every time in a quiet gym. No one was there, that the technique just became second nature. Dribble, spin, follow through. Dribble, spin, follow through. Every shot was the exact same so that it became a habit. When we practice breath work, mindfulness, body scans in a calm and safe space, it becomes habit, and our bodies, our kind of natural memory system of habit starts to just kick in when we remind ourselves that we need to do this. But then when we're in the moment, we need to remind ourselves to do this. So the exact same thing that I do in the workplace, practicing that at home, whether first thing in the morning or in the evening, in a quiet time when you don't need it, right, is a great way to even have some awareness to be able to say, I'm really somebody who holds my jaw. I can start to know myself a little bit better so that when I'm in the game time, I can know, oh, wow, I know that first before I take that dribble, dribble, spin, fall through, I need to release my jaw a little bit, right? I get to know myself and my nuances around regulation that can be really helpful. So having anxiety regulation techniques that are useful and helpful in the environment, and then being able to practice them at home when it's not game time.
Well said, Dr. Lamb, as always. And we have a fabulous series on anxiety and ADHD with other MedCircle doctors. We will link to those in the description of this video. Thank you for watching this video and checking out our other MedCircle content. I'm Kyle Kittleson. Remember, whatever you're going through, you got this.